Hi guys, my name is Rhett and I've had some requests, so what I'll be sharing with you today is how I make my 3D renders that look like this, a powder explosion burst. And so what you'll need is Cinema 4D, Octane Renderer and After Effects. So let's go. I have had a number of people ask me how I got this effect. Just let me open up my Instagram, my side project called Mankind. This sort of particle explosion effect here, a number of people have asked me. I've done a few different versions of it on my Instagram channel, and I've had a number of people ask me how I did it or if I can do a mini tutorial. So here it is. So I've just fired up Cinema 4D. What I will do first is just throw in a sphere. I don't want it to render perfect. I'll make that sphere about 50 centimeters. Let's bump up the segments to 48. Then let's see, what else do I want? I want a camera. And now I've got my buttons up here, but obviously if I just open up my Octane window, anything I have available, these Octane options up here are available through objects or materials in the Octane renderer. So let's just get that boring window going. So let me just set this camera, just zero everything out. I might just drop in a sun so it makes it a bit easier for me to just see what I'm doing. But let me just zero out everything on my camera first. Cool. Let's make this minus 1,000, say, a bit smaller. Good. Now I will set up my Octane renderer. Yeah, output, I'll change that to 1200 square. Let me adjust my sun. Let's say 120 and not quite sunset. Let's go minus 10 on the pitch. There. I like to set up basic lighting because the beauty of Octane is that you get to see feedback when you're doing something. So I like to set up everything first before I add any materials. So let me just put I want a background plate in here, so let me just set that maybe to something like 4,000 by 4,000. I'll put it to plus Z so it changes its angle, and the segments don't really matter, so I'll just put them right down. And let's put this way into the distance so it doesn't affect the lighting. Yep, something like say 2500. So now I've got a flat background, some lighting. Good. I usually like to set off my background with some custom lighting so it gets a similar color. If I attach a material color to it, you can see before the lighting it's just taking on the blue shadowy hue of the shade of the sun, which is my only lighting at the moment. So I'd like to add in a separate light just for the background. So let me bring it, I'll make it as white as the background, put it behind my object so it doesn't affect my object, raise it up higher, rotate it, let's make it about 40, and then that's really bright. I usually click this one here to make it a more natural fall off. It changes the distribution and the texture colour there to make it a bit more natural. Not bad. I'm going to go a bit higher with that, so we've got just a bit of a gradient fall off now from light to dark, so I don't mind that. A bit lighter. Okay, so it's the basic building blocks, and now for some particle magic. Just save that. So let me add in now, what we want is objects Octane Scatter. Let me just organize my scene here. I'll put the lights at the top, Octane Scatter at the bottom. Okay, so Octane Scatter. What I'm going to do is I'm going to fill this Octane Scatter with some basic primitives. So let's use a sphere. And I'm going to take it right down, because we're going to use these as like a small particle. So let's say 1 centimeter and 3 segments. So really small. I'll drop that into the Octane Scatter. I'll select Octane Scatter, and that initial sphere that I put in there, I'm going to use that as a surface for Octane Scatter. So I drop that into surface, and I'm going to choose surface for the distribution. So using this sphere, but I'm happy to turn this off now, this sphere. Leave it active, but to turn off, it doesn't show in render or preview. So now you see I've got, let's see, a count of 1,000 tiny spheres distributed across the surface of that initial sphere. So if I come in and have a look at that, I've got something like that. And the basic idea of what we're going to do is we're going to take this position. So it might not be spindled down, but if you look in Octane Scatter, down to position, and this one here, X, Y, Z, if I enlarge that, you can see how that is moving and affecting the particles on the surface of that sphere. And then if I up the number of particles to 10,000, even 100,000, it sort of fills in that sphere. So what I'll do is I'll start with sort of a manageable count on those particles. And the beauty of this is Octane Scatter will work sort of like a MoGraph cloner, where it will clone objects. But if you've ever tried to put 10,000, 100,000 spheres into a cloner, well, my machine just freezes up and just will not do anything. But the beauty of Octane Renderer is it works off the GPU, and so does this Octane Scatter. So we can do big numbers for this Octane Scatter. So let me just go back out to my camera. We have the idea of what we're going to do. We're going to enlarge that. Let's set it to, say, something 500, or maybe that's too much. Actually, let me change my camera setting focal length to about 50, which I usually like around 50. Just get that right first. And let's dial that back down again. And let's add another 0 to that so we've got more particles. Great. Now what I can do with this position is I can set a shader to it. So I can come and grab any image. I have created this grey marbling image just from my archives of painting and that, but you can literally grab any image and apply it, and the grayscale image will act like a displacement, so it'll change the effect. Like the darker areas will be less affected and lighter areas will be more affected. So when I'm changing this position here, it's affecting the position of these particles. And that's pretty much the basis of what we're going to do. And then once I have composed something like that, it sort of emulates the look of an exploding powder explosion. And if I add another 0 to bump it up to, say, a count of, what's that, 1,000,000? We really start to get the effect of the powder explosion. So that's the idea and the effect that we're going for. Once you get up to the count of about 1,000,000 or so, it can get really tough on your GPU. So when I'm working with it, I tend to drop it down, a bit less, especially if I'm trying to animate something. But that's the basis of how to get that effect. So let me just add a bit of color into this. For the background, let me make it dark. I might go for a blue. A bluish style to this one. So where's my plane? Add that to the background. Let's say I want the scatter a bit less than that, say 350. Maybe a little bit less again. And then let's add a glossy material. Let's make that bluish. Maybe sort of vibrant. We'll see how that goes. I might dial it back. So that will be my particle color. And bam. Dial it back slightly. And so what you can do, so that's obviously, it's coloring every single sphere with that color. But what we can do is we want to add some random variation into it. We'll just duplicate that sphere. I'll copy and paste another of that material. Maybe I'll choose a green, and I'll drop that on top of that sphere. So now half the spheres will be this blue, and then half the spheres will be this green, evenly distributed randomly across those clones in the scatter. I don't want so much green. Maybe I just want more blue with a touch of green. So now I've got a 3:1 ratio. Should have, like, for every 3 blue spheres, I've got 1 green. So sweet. Just going to play around with the color slightly. Drop that down a bit so it fits all in the frame, maybe. Cool. So that is the basis of how to get that exploding effect. And now I could just render that out as a still. Maybe I'll just save this. But if I want to get that animated, all I have to do is hold down Option on the position. So I've got my look, but I want to start at 0. So let me Option on position. Let's say I want 200 frames. So I'll go to frame 200. I'll bump this right up to, say, 1000. Set a keyframe there as well. So now you can see, the huge explosion has happened. It's going to take some time to render, but the huge explosion has happened. But it starts off as a sphere, and then let me just take this count down again so we can get a bit of a playback happening. And if I press play, you can see how the little spheres over time change their position depending on that shader. What I also like to do is, because I want to give it the look of an explosion, I want the impact and the position to change over time much quicker. So I'm just going to right click on the position, show F curve. I select my Y position. You can see how it's slowly starting, then it slowly ends. I want to ramp that up. So pretty much the opposite way around. Maybe a bit more. So let's have a look at that now. Yeah, much better. So big explosion at the start, slow motion during the middle. Yeah, that's much more what I prefer. And then I can just also, the good thing is with this position particles, it's really quick to render, really quick to get a visual idea of what you're trying to do. So let me just add some zeros to that again to bump it way up. But the drawback is that these, we call them clones, these little spheres in the scatter won't react to dynamics, gravity or any other such dynamics that you put on it. And also haven't found that they, I can't put sort of motion blur on them either. with a with an Octane object tag, because they are just being positioned over time. It's not really a dynamic function. So if there's if someone knows a way of doing that, let me know. But otherwise, I add the motion blur in afterwards. So if I was to take this image and I'll just change it to, so I think with these images I just searched, let me just open up this one. You can see it gives you a totally different effect, a totally different look to the explosion. I'll open up a different one. Once again, a different look again. I'll stick with my original one that I've made myself, but I think I just searched for marbled painting art, and then there's these organic sort of looking things that you could literally use any image for the displacement, but using an organic, painterly, random image style I found works pretty well with this organic explosion. Yeah, and that's it. So I have my settings. I usually go, I was on direct lighting, I usually use path tracing. If I'm doing a still, somewhere around 1,000 or 2,000 samples. Often I'll adjust these down as well, but if I'm doing a still I might leave them up. Let's bump up the count. Yeah, and we're getting much more definition of the shadows with a higher count. Looking pretty good. Let me just adjust this background color again. Something a bit deeper. Cool. Now, if I was going to render this out, I would put the samples right down, because although it's pretty quick, if I was to do a still on my machine, it'll still take me about 5 minutes. So I'll just set this up to render the animation so you can see how that works. Let's go all frames, save. Let's create a new folder for this. Let's call it Nova Shoot, or Tut as many people say, and let's just say Nova. Nova. I usually use Targa when I save out, but if I'm being lazy, I don't care about the compression so much. I'll use JPEG, which is what I'll use right now. All done. Let's go back to the start, save my file. I'm going to set this to 8, depth of 8 as well. Put the GI clamp right down, maybe to about 4, and the max samples 512, so something really quite low. Set the render priority to high. And away we go. So we should have our folder full of image sequences that we've saved out in JPEG. So we just want to bring that folder now into After Effects. Just drag it in, just drag the whole folder in, it will create an image sequence of JPEGs. Now I like to interpret that footage and change the frames per second to 25. That's what I just like to work with usually. Drag that down to this button here, and that will create a composition in the same size of what you've saved out. In my case it's pretty small. It's probably about that size on screen. I enlarge it to 200% so I can see what I'm working with a bit better. So great, now we've got, if we drag through, you can see we've got all our images there for us. I can pick up a couple of issues, but so first what I like to do is, it's called Pixel Motion Blur. So let me grab that and put that on top. And what that does, if I zoom in, is it gives us a bit of a fake motion blur. So it calculates the frames before, it looks at the pixels on the frame, pixels previous frames, and tries to create what it thinks it's anticipating would be motion blur, and will be a lot easier to see at the start where there's lots of action happening. If I off and on, off and on. So I usually pump this up a little bit more to create that fake motion blur that we couldn't get out of Cinema 4D. So great, we've got that. Next, I like to just adjust the image a little bit to give it a look. This is not essential, but you can use whatever sort of levels or color correction software you like. But this is one I got a while ago and I quite like the look of it. I give it a default look. I take the grain down and then I just adjust the levels to my liking. And it just gives it a little bit, I might give it a little bit of grain actually. It just gives it a little bit more of a filmic look that I might be going for. So before and after, it looks fine before, but I just like adjusting my levels to something I'm happier with. And then an issue I can see, so it's quite a big issue in Octane Renderer, is hot pixels or this noise, especially when working with lots of sort of light bounces and particles. You can see these full white pixels and dots where it's sort of clipping. The renderer didn't know what to do with it, or it just sort of randomly sprinkled all over the place. So obviously we want to get rid of those. We could try and fix it in Cinema 4D. You can up the samples, play around with the GI clamp, and some of those can work. But for this scenario, what I found works quickest is dust and scratches. So default, it just makes everything blurry, trying to get rid of all dust and scratches. But what we can do is, if we take the threshold way up to the top, it gets rid of it altogether, and then just keep your eye on the white pixels and just drag it back until, see how they're starting to disappear? Just drag it back until they have all gone. So there's one more there. So I might set this to something like 120 now that I've dragged it back. So I can see I'm zoomed in right here at 400%, so the quality is quite low, but I'm just looking at those white pixels. So turn it off, I can see them there. and now it's on, and we haven't really affected the quality of the rest of the image, just got rid of those white dots. Let's see, is there still... Still saw one up there, so I might just change that to 110, bring it down, and I think that's it. I'm pretty happy with that, so just give it a preview play through. You can still see a couple of white pixels, so I might just take the dust and scratches down one more level, but I'm not going to be too pedantic about it. I try and get these videos or images done, within a couple of hours for my daily, so I don't want to be getting things exactly perfect, just good enough to get out. No one can tell. So that's great. I think instead of starting on a sphere, I might just start one frame in, start on just the explosion, and that will take us all the way through to filling up the screen with particles, and then now just to save it out, I think. Export, add to render queue, QuickTime, H.264 is what I usually go for. There's no audio on this one, and we'll just render that out, and we are done.